Okay. I hope everyone's having a good Thursday. There's something weird going on with my screen, so I'm not sure what that is. I'm going to try not sharing anymore, and then I'm going to try to fix that again. So bear with me as I do that. Before we get started, goodness, y'all. Okay, let's see. Okay, I think that's better. Let me just close this out. Well, I'm going to remove my AI guy. There we go. I don't need to report him. No big deal. All right. Well, again, I hope everyone's having a really great Thursday. Um, again, I'm not quite sure what's going on with my presentation here. I hope everybody can see my slides. Yes. Okay, good. Oof. What a day, y'all. What a day. There we go. That makes me feel better. Okay, everything looks better to me. If it looks weird to you, I'm so sorry. All right, let's take a second just to ground ourselves. I've had to do that a lot this week. It's just kind of a reminder that ACT again is a practice. Not every week is going to be beautiful. Doesn't mean that we don't face challenges. It doesn't mean that we're always going to be happy, but it does mean that we can notice when we need to take a break. We can notice when things feel weird. We can lean into that for a minute. And we can accept the fact that we signed on to do kind of a hard job. Behavior analysis is not for the weary. It's not for the faint of heart, in my opinion. I don't know if y'all feel the same, but that's how I feel. So this is step 11 in our series. It's a supervision um, CEU this evening. So you get a bonus CEU. I recognize that last month I didn't record this the right way. So I apologize. I ended up doing it to an audience of an RBT and one of my clinical director. And so, or our clinical director, who's amazing, but not for anybody else. So I apologize. So we'll talk about catching that up at the end of the series or at the end of the CEU this evening. So tonight is ACT and supervision. Surprisingly enough, we're not going to be reviewing an article that has anything to do with ACT, but we are going to be reviewing one of my favorite supervision articles. It's actually, I think, a lot of y'all's favorites. It's hard for this one not to be, or at least it should be. So add it to your repertoire. It was sent out via the calendar invite, but as always, not as always, as often as I can remember, which I try to be always, but it isn't always. Um, so thank you for those who have pointed that out. But I will put in the recording and article whenever I send out the email with all of that good stuff. Hopefully this recording is recording. This has been the bane of my existence with technology. It's really just with recording meetings that I feel like I struggle sometimes with Zoom, but that's fine. Other than that, I really enjoyed the platform. It's a good one. So with that said, we've done a little bit of a grounding exercise. We've talked about what we're going to do tonight, talked a little bit about what we're going to be doing in the future. So let's get right on into it if we might. So today we're going to review again, like I said, one of my favorite articles. Then we're going to do something really kind of boring, which, man, I hate it whenever I bring up boring stuff. This is also, I think, too, a misnomer whenever um, many of us in our field talk about being trauma informed or child led or utilizing ACT within all of our practices, which is that then that means that we never use any of those things that we needed to learn for the task list, right? And that, a good old fashioned task analysis is outdated and we shouldn't use it. That's not always the case. So I'm going to have us create a task analysis today. And then we're going to talk about what that looks like with ongoing committed action. So today, our literature review is again one of my favorite articles. So go ahead and take a look at it. Sellers, Valentino, and LeBlanc. I've taken the highlights for y'all here. But again, please take your time to review that article. It's actually not very long, but it has some really great guidelines and examples within it, as always with these three ladies, which is great about them. I love it. A full disclosure, um, I do know them personally and professionally, and so there is that as well. So please be aware that there's a reason why this is one of my favorite supervision articles. And it's because when I worked at Trumpet Behavioral Health, which is no longer under that name, I don't believe anymore. I believe it's now under a different entity. Um, Dr. Sellers was had just left as the clinical director, executive clinical director for the region, and Dr. Long was head of all of it, basically. And Dr. Valentino was leading things up from California and then from abroad. So they also were pretty instrumental in my supervision training, which was amazing. So I can't tout these ladies and their expertise enough. With that said, when we look at this 2018 article, we're going to reframe this with an ACT lens here in a little bit to help show how everything that we've been talking about with ACT and practicing these things for ourselves is still 100% behavior analytic. And again, when we look at best practices, we can take from the most rigid of experiments and still use some sort of application that has an ACT frame to it, if you will. That's kind of the beauty about the flexibility of acceptance and commitment therapy and psychological therapy, or psychological flexibility, excuse me. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so the guidelines and tenets proposed in the article. Step one, establish, oh, sorry, a typo, my bad. Establish an effective relationship. Establish a plan for content and competence. So, using that task list, how are you going to measure that they understand this to the point of being able to apply it, right? Evaluate the effects of this plan that you've created. Incorporate ethics and professional development. So, what else are you doing? Like, are you really applying this ethical lens to it? And also, are you giving opportunities for your supervisee to obtain further professional development? And what does that look like? Is that with training? Probably. But is that also with looking at um, other applications outside of just direct service work or cutting out stimuli or cutting and pasting graphs into treatment plans and or any of the similar that we typically assign, right? And then how do we continue to foster this relationship? What does that look like from a behavior analytic or not behavior analytic, from an ACT perspective? Obviously, these are all behavior analytic already. Okay. So here's our flip. Here's our reframe. Our first guideline, establish an effective relationship. Man, I have that typo again. Oh, I think I know why. It's because I copied and pasted that column. Sorry, y'all. So establish an effective relationship. So how we do this is we assess our values. What are my values? What are your values? Where is their alignment? That does not mean that you are never going to have a conflict of values It does not mean that your values have to completely align, as then like y'all are twins, soulmates, lobsters. That's not what this means. This means that there's alignment with your values. They want to learn. You love to teach. Cool. They want to foster their further understanding of what it looks like to apply compassionate care within ABA. That's one of your values too. What? Perfect, right? But that doesn't mean that you're not going to find some sort of conflicts along the way. This is this is a very passionate field, right? There are a lot of very driven people who choose to be in this field or who are somehow led to this field. And we have some strong personalities. Clearly, that means there's going to be a little bit of conflict there, then, every now and then. We're not asking that supervision is perfect. Even those three ladies who I'm praising still have experienced conflict. And there are still things that I would say don't always align with my values, right? So, like, I'm not twinsies with them. We're not soulmates, but there's enough alignment there to where I'm like, man, I trust what these ladies say, right? Where I find there to be the most conflict, and we're going to get into this in a little bit whenever we talk about diffusion strategies, but where I find the most conflict really does come from feedback and misunderstanding. And also recognizing too that with supervisees, they're still growing that skill of what it looks like to apply this science. They have a really good understanding of their science, right? They passed the exam that's pretty tough to pass and is really jargony, right? So, oh, sorry, I'm thinking more of mentorship. Sorry, my bad. They've been in coursework where they're learning all of this jargon, right? So everything's really new for them. And they're finding these difficulties with this term operant conditioning, and what does that really mean? Because I've never seen this before. And the explanation that's given to me in applied behavior analysis is not something I can visualize because I work in this context, right? This is something that happens often, right? And so sometimes there's that conflict, and we have a tendency to forget that. But then as they're starting to develop these skills and learn and grow, their confidence starts to grow too, which means that it's more difficult for them to accept feedback. It's natural. They're we're meeting each other, right? We're like that's the hope. We don't want to always be like this. We do want them to start to meet us where we are too, with where they are with their skills. That's our goal. So as they start to meet us, there is going to be some challenge and some conflict there because it's some struggling with understanding, and also they're giving us a different perspective of an application that maybe we haven't thought of before. And sometimes too, yeah, they're wrong, and that's okay. And sometimes, yeah, we're wrong, and that's okay. And sometimes it's difficult for people to recover from that conflict. So we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit too, when we're talking about establishing this task analysis here in a second. So as you establish this effective relationship, you've assessed your values. Remember, you're not twins. But now you're going to develop these committed actions for what this looks like to kind of foster this relationship. So for me, that means, well, we should probably meet on a regular basis to make sure that what we're doing is committed and measurable. So if I say that we're doing supervision and you're doing concentrated field work hours, I've got to meet a certain percentage of the amount of time that you're writing down for you're putting down for your fieldwork hours, right? So with that, let's make this really intentional. We don't want to be catching up at the end of the month to make sure that we've got all of the supervision that you need. Meanwhile, you've probably needed supervision for quite some time before then, right? And by you, I mean your supervisee. So your supervisees needed some supervision, right? You've needed to provide supervision for some time. So the next thing that you're going to be really thinking about is noticing and observing. So this is that self as context piece. What do you notice about what your supervision practices are teaching or evoking or allowing your supervisee to demonstrate? For example, are you always the one going through the feedback and saying, okay, I'm just doing direct supervision with you, one-on-one, observing with the client, and I'm never meeting with you outside of that to talk about your hopes and your dreams? Is that something that I'm noticing about myself in supervision? hmm It's really easy to fall into that pattern in clinics because we're just going through the motions of billing 97155 and also providing supervision to either our RBTs or supervisee fieldwork candidates, right? So as we go through that, we're just kind of checking the boxes. And to add that extra piece of listening to your supervisee, then you're kind of missing a step of that relationship piece, right? You've established a relationship, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an effective relationship. It might be effective in the moment whenever you're there and they have some observer effects and their behavior changes short term. But then what does that mean whenever you walk away? Can go back to what we were doing before. So be aware of that. Notice and observe how your supervision practices impact the supervision or impact the behavior analytic practices of the supervisee. So this next piece, establish a plan for content and competence. We've already got that schedule of how often you're going to be seeing this person. But what's that content look like? I'm going to be real, y'all. We this past semester or this fall, I started doing supervision for um the University of Western Georgia in Georgia, obviously, but it's all remote. And so that meant that I had to be very strategic in how I was planning my supervision. I'm 2 hours behind everyone. So what I ended up doing was going through the task list and saying, okay, here's what my thought process is. I want them to have these skills or a basic understanding of these things by the time that they finish their fieldwork experience. If I look at this on a four-part basis, I can break down the task list into four different parts to teach and focus these four things on these four things. So that is my plan for their content. Yep, seems pretty basic because I'm just using the task list. Great. That's what supervisees need to have a basic understanding of and a fluency with, right? So I plan for that teaching. Now, speaking of fluency, that's the next thing that I do because my next job as their supervisor is to get them to pass the exam. I've had supervisees in the past not pass the exam. I've had one supervisee in the past not pass the exam, and it's really tough. And you put, as a supervisor, put a lot of weight on it. You're just like, what did I miss? So you notice and observe, and then you're going to change your behavior, right? So here's what I've added since then. As part of my plan for content and competence, staff meds, something else that's not acceptance and commitment therapy, but it is a committed action, 1 minute at a time. And it's values based, right? So that committed action because It's getting them closer to that goal of this overall experience of whatever it is that we're doing, right? As behavior analysts, certified behavior analysts, right? So SAPMEDS, if you aren't familiar with, is a fluency-based way to teach or to learn different vocabulary words or fluency-based things. Um, for example, you can take the approximately 375 terms that you need to have pretty fluent understanding for the exam, put those on flashcards, shuffle them, and 1 minute at a time, go through them, make a pile of correct and a pile of errors. Chart your responses so that you see over time how your correct responding is improving and your errors are decreasing. Then what you'll find is when you take those mock exams, you're going to be able to answer those questions much more quickly because you can pick out exactly what the for the fluency based like for the you can pick it out more fluently what the term is and what the definition is or what it is that they're looking for within the case example scenario. So plan it that way or plan it in a way that's meaningful for you. I'm giving you examples, right? It can be totally something else that you're more comfortable with. Like maybe you're like, you know what? I actually just like to do mock exams. Great. You do you, girl, boy, y'all, whatever you want. That's fine. You do what works best for you and what you feel most competent within your supervision practices. And then don't forget to continue to learn and grow. That's what we should be modeling as supervisors, right? Is that when we're offering these opportunities, which we'll jump in just a second, for professional development, we're modeling what that looks like by attending CEUs, not just watching a CEU and saying like, oh, I'm trying to get my 32 units before the end of this month, and I'm begging my the instructor to send me my certificate earlier because I only have 10 days to do it. Sorry. That we've all been in that boat. Notice, observe, change your behavior. Um, be really intentional with the CEUs that you choose. I think most of y'all have with choosing these CEUs because these aren't just passive. But while you're intentionally watching these CEUs and doing the work for these CEUs, you're not multitasking and your supervisees are seeing that, right? That's important. Okay, so evaluate the effects of your supervision practices. Check in. Offer them to give you feedback. Also, measure, check in. Are your SAF meds working? You haven't started SAF meds yet. Let's do it. Let's do it together. Let's go ahead and do this, right? Notice, observe, change. So that's part of evaluating the effects, right? Is this still working? Are you still learning? Do you feel like you've plateaued? If so, I need to fix something because the learner is always right. And if you feel like you've plateaued as the supervisee, I, as the supervisor, need to be the person who fixes that and solves that. Now, this incorporating ethics and professional development. This for me is continuing to check in on that values alignment and modeling what it is to look like to be an ongoing learner as a supervisor. What does this look like? How are you then giving them opportunities to grow and develop these skills in a way that's actually going to be useful for them? So it's something we were talking about earlier is we often will just kind of assign the things that we don't want to do as BCBAs to the supervisors or supervisees, right? That's a pretty common occurrence. I say that as somebody who has fallen into this trap. Um, it's easy to do that. It's harder to teach them something because it's going to take time away from your day, right? Man, that sucks. There are times that I've legitimately said, like, I actually don't have time to teach you how to do this right now. I do have time at 8 a.m. on Friday morning via telehealth for 45 minutes. Does that work for you? And sometimes that is what it looks like for me, unfortunately. And so I do feel sorry for my supervisees sometimes, or our supervisees, but or new BCBAs who I'm trying to teach something to, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, y'all. But this is my schedule right now. Um, so recognize that no, you're not superhuman. That doesn't mean that you need to schedule yourself when you can't, but be meaningful and say, like, okay, I actually don't have time this week. But if I look at next week, I do have time on Tuesday. Can I teach you this so that it's helping you develop X, Y, and Z skill? And an example of some of the, or some examples of some of these things that you might want to consider would be, how are you going to write a program? How are you going to choose how you're measuring the behavior that you're targeting or the skill that you're targeting? Is this a skill or is this a behavior that's happening frequently enough to where you can measure it? Is it salient or clear enough to where when somebody sees that it's happening, they're like, oh, that's it? Or is the way that you're measuring it clear enough to where you're like, there's the on, there's the off? Or do you need to find a different way to measure it? Or is it so significant or so insignificant rather that you really don't need to be worrying about it and maybe instead you can be tracking skill development as an alternative, right? Um, these are things that you can be teaching, these types of critical thinking skills, right? And again, this is a question that comes up regularly across anybody that I've ever worked with when it comes to ACT and psychological flexibility. And that is when you're teaching somebody ACT, how do you do it? How do you teach your supervisees how to do ACT? How to teach somebody else, a learner or a child, how to engage and act? What am I going to say, do you think? You got to start with you. You got to model it first. So you as the supervisor, I noticed that I was getting really tense. And I think it's because I repeat this often and it starts to get rather frustrating, right? So that's something that I notice, like these feelings of like, why do I have the feeling of frustration when someone asks a pretty legitimate question, which is just like, how do I teach somebody else how to do this? That's a valid question. And I think we as behavior analysts also sometimes are like, man, this seems like second nature to me that it's hard for me to almost answer it. But we have to answer hard things. We have to do challenging things. And as supervisors, this is where patience comes in. So notice and observe and relax and say, like, you know what? I get it. It's a hard question for me to answer because it's been something that I've practiced for so many years now. And for me, what I have found is the most effective way to teach acceptance and commitment therapy is by practicing it myself and reading a lot about it. So, reading different resources, following the literature from Dr. Stephen C. Hayes, Dr. Russ Harris, Jonathan Tarbox, really leaning into three white dudes and what they have to say about acceptance and commitment therapy and how to practice this. And one of the things that Tarbox will say is that you just have to make that one change. It's a choice, right? And Dr. Hayes says the same thing. ACT is simply a choice-making procedure. If we really want to look at it from a very elementary experimental lens, you have a choice. You can choose to do this, or you can choose to do that. One is going to lead you towards your values, and one is going to take you further from your values. One is going to look like it's going to take you closer to your values, and one is going to actually take you closer to your values, right? One is going to look like it's something that you value, but if you were to actually notice and observe, you would see the pattern of avoidance, right? So these are the things that we have to think about with ACT. And also that it's a practice. So, like what I was talking about before, and this is going into this next thing, which is continuing the relationship, which is with all relationships, conflicts arise. It's inevitable. You have a choice to name the conflict and say, hey, this happened, and I'd like to move forward, or this happened, and I have to move in a different direction, right? Those are both fair options when conflicts arise. But it's also important to practice the skill of diffusion. Now, diffusion is one of those things where we have lots of beautiful metaphors within the realm of ACT, right? Leaves on a stream, ride in the wave, right? Beautiful. Everybody can visualize these things. Some people can like relax just at like the thought of visualizing leaves going down the stream and their thoughts passing them by. That's not always helpful for neurodivergent people. That's not always helpful for people who aren't quite understanding what this looks like to let go. They haven't felt the reinforcement of what it feels like to practice diffusion, especially when we're used to rigidity being reinforced. And in grad school, we're given a lot of very rigid information, experimental, right? That's a lot of what we're given in grad school. And now we're trying to show them, like, hey, you got to apply it now, which means you've got to be a little bit more flexible than some of the things that you've learned here. But here's what this term is that you're learning in this applied setting, right? So, yeah, schedules of reinforcement are still going to matter even though you're doing ACT. Yes, you're still going to have to do sometimes SB and SBT and ACT. And no, when you're trying to teach a student how to do ACT, you're not going to say, please define diffusion. Instead, what you're going to say is, oh man, I'm noticing that this is kind of difficult and challenging right now. Sometimes I need to take a deep breath, roll my shoulders back, have some water whenever a challenge, whenever I'm in front of a challenge or a challenge is in front of me, right? We're modeling these things. We're not saying, tell me, do you think that you need to practice diffusion right now? No, it's not really accessible. It's the same thing with our supervisees. So when a challenge arises, we're going to model these types of diffusion skills for them and for ourselves because we also have to work through the challenge. So today I started getting really heightened when I got feedback about something and it was I was in the middle of the meeting and the feedback was that something was going to be really expensive. And I was just like, oh my God. And like at this point, I think I just got an email too about something else. And I was just like, that was also expensive. And I was just like, as a business owner and as an adult in 2025, you're just like, everything's so fucking expensive, right? Um, and so I noticed that I was like, you know, type type in the keyboard princess over here. And I was like, you know what? I'm noticing that I'm getting real heated here. So I instead said, I need you to reach out to so and so instead. So sometimes what we need to practice with diffusion is like, okay, I just noticed that I got real heated. Sorry. Let me take a couple of deep breaths, right? The other day I was doing some like program development for one of our learners. And I was reading over something and it made no sense to me. And I was like, okay, hold on. And I just, it's like, you just need a minute. All right, I'm good, right? So it's okay for us to model these things. It's okay for us to name the frustration and to name the challenge and to say like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that I didn't do a great job of explaining what this term is. And here we are in this context, and I thought that I did, and I didn't. So let me go through it again." Right? That's sometimes what needs to happen within these practices. And then what we find through diffusion and facing challenges together is that we're fostering and continuing this ongoing relationship within supervision that's meaningful and impactful, right? Okay, awesome, y'all. Okay, so this is your task right now. Go ahead, pause the video if you want to, doesn't matter. Go ahead and pull up a piece of paper, notebook, paper, pull it up on Google Notes or your post-it. Doesn't matter, but we're going to do an old-fashioned task analysis. Now, I've broken this down into three steps, three basic tenets, if you will. So I think that it'd be more beneficial for everyone, including yourselves, if you break down what step one looks like, break down what step two looks like, and break down what step three looks like. So let's do this together, okay? So step one, what does it look like to establish a relationship that's values based from your perspective? So, from my perspective, I'm going to say first thing that I do is one, I complete a values assessment. Step two, they complete a values assessment. Step three, we meet to see where our values align. Cool. Then we discuss what that looks like for us within the bounds of our supervision relationship. How often should we meet? How do you feel that you receive feedback best? So assess preferences. What? I am not like a fan of good old-fashioned preference assessments. I am a fan of in situ reinforcer analyses. However, when it comes to supervisory relationships, it's really important to assess preferences for feedback. Do you prefer written feedback? Do you prefer like vocal feedback? Do you want in the moment feedback? Or do you want me to wait until a certain moment? If I need to pause the session because of something going really off the rails, are you okay with that? Well, you have to be because I want to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe. Right? Like naming those types of boundaries. Um, those are the conversations that have to happen at the beginning. If you're doing virtual or telehealth supervision, it's going to look different. You're not providing that kind of support. So this type of task analysis might look a little bit different, where instead you're like, okay, so I'm going to review the videos. I'm going to and let them know like this is when I'm going to review the videos and this is when you're going to get feedback on the videos. For me, for my students who are 2 hours ahead of me, I don't always review the videos when they send them to me because sometimes it's over the weekend. And I still hold those pretty firm boundaries. So I say, I review the videos the last week of the month, and I set aside time to do that. That's what I'm doing tomorrow, actually. So that's when I review my video observations. Sometimes I get to watch it live. Fantastic. And we make sure that we arrange for that to happen right away. For those observations, I typically try not to interject, but I might type in or chat in feedback. I do the same thing when I'm doing telehealth supervision with supervisees here with our agency because I don't want to necessarily be intrusive, but I still want to give and deliver feedback if it's necessary, right? I might also then ask questions to seek feedback. So I'm going to set that up also in that initial relationship setting, which is hey, I'm also going to really need your feedback too, because some of these programs that we're writing, I need your feedback to make sure that when you're implementing it, it makes sense. Or I'm going to need your feedback to make sure that when I say this, you understand what I'm saying. Or when I correct this, that it is received in a way that is going to be acceptable or accepted and applied by you, right? So, step one can have 10 different steps in it, right? That's okay. Now let's move on to step two. Schedule and structure how to embed committed actions. So, like what I mentioned earlier, you could go through the task list and say, okay, today we're going to talk about these task list items. Here's what I'll tell you about that type of structure from experience. That's the plan. Be prepared for your supervisees, though, to sometimes take that plan off the rails because they are misunderstanding something else, right? It's totally fine. For example, um, on group supervision, sometimes I'll say like, okay, this is what we're going to be talking about today, and that's fine. We'll talk about that for a little while, and then I'll open it up for the last 15 minutes, and I'll say, okay, what are some things that are going on? And they're like, this just happened in ethics. We have this scenario, and we don't know what to do. And I'm like, ooh. And so, like, we'll talk about that for 15 minutes, and then that'll come up again in our one-on-one, right? So, the task analysis item that I planned on talking, or task list item that I planned on talking about in one-on-one, now instead we're talking about the scenario from one of their classes. Totally fine, because then what we're doing with those scenarios is we are then applying that to their real life applications that they are working in, right, for their fieldwork hours. That's fine. Plans and routines and schedules give us something to come back to when we need it. Because here's what will happen too. Yes, be prepared for like going off of that. But then the next week, that's not an issue anymore. And then if you don't have anything planned and you're hoping that they're going to bring a problem to the table and they're like, no, everything's good this week, you're going to be like, fuck, how am I going to fill this hour? Right? Or what are we going to talk about now? I've got to make this supervision meaningful and worthwhile. Go back to the task list. Okay, awesome. Well, last week we were going to talk about this, but we didn't. We talked about that instead. So let's talk about this now. Go back to the plan. That's how I like to do it. And again, checking in with those staff meds. All right. How are your fluencies going? How are your 1 minute timings going? Have you done one yet? If you haven't done one yet, let's do one together right now, right? Get a little bit more intrusive with your prompting. Not just checking in, seeing how you're doing. We're going to do a timing right now. You need a baseline score. That's it. People are afraid of baseline. They don't want to say, I didn't know any of the terms. And as I said, zero is just baseline. It's fine. Think about what a beautiful graph that would be. Okay, so step three. What is this going to look like whenever challenges arise? What does it look like whenever you are troubleshooting? There's confusion with their hours. I thought that I could collect can I not count this? Can I count that out? Can I count those? What if I'm babysitting my sister's kids? Can I count those hours if I'm doing ABA with them? No. You may not count your nephews. Nope, not no 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 nope nope. Can't do that, babe. Sorry. I know that stinks, right? Learning new terms is tough. It's one of the biggest challenges that our supervisees face. So practicing diffusion before these things and saying like, I recognize that this is really challenging. You're looking at this as though it's a huge issue and a huge weight on your chest, right? And so we're going to practice like this diffusion exercise of what it feels like to let go of these things. And now we're going to go into doing a 1 minute timing together because I want you to see how quick this is, that it isn't a big issue. It isn't a big deal. You got to separate it. Move it away from your face, right? So it's not right there. It's not such a big deal because you're still trying to avoid it. You're like But you just need to go through it, right? We just need to teach our supervisees to do that same thing, right? Okay. Um, cool. So that's our task analysis. That is your project. Create this task analysis so that when you're setting up what your supervision practices look like, it's flexible, but it has structure. Your values are at the forefront of what you're doing. And also, the values of the supervisee are also at the forefront. You're meeting them together, right? Here's where my boundary is. Here's where your need is. Cool. Here's where we can meet. That's a really important thing to establish, right? Because what will end up happening is you're going to burn yourself out of trying to meet everybody with supervision when you need, when you can or when they can, and then it becomes really reactive. And when you burn out because you haven't created some sort of structure about what this is going to look like, and you're just reacting to the environment, the stimuli as they come, the changes in stimuli as they come, the people as they come, supervisees as they're like walking zombies coming towards you. I can't meet at this time, I can meet at that time. By the way, I had time yesterday. Did you have time yesterday? Since I didn't have time with you yesterday, can we meet today? And you're like, oh my God, no. I've given you my set schedule. I can meet with you in this block of time, or this block of time, or this block of time. Please choose one of those times. And I'm sorry for that being a firm boundary, but I have to stick firm to that because I've got a million, bajillion, gazillion other things to do, right? And it stresses us out. We're also modeling what it looks like to manage time and to say, hey, I'm here to support you. And I also am here to support myself with what my schedule looks like. But also, we can't avoid supervision either. You still have to offer some times that they can meet. You still have to be present, right? And schedule yourself and say, like, okay, I can actually be there. I'm going to be there on Tuesday for an hour and a half in person at this client's house to fully support you. You got my word and you show up. That's really important, right? You can't avoid that and then get upset with them because you missed it. Because then that is, oh my gosh, sorry, T, because that is on you, right? That's completely on you. Be proactive though. Schedule, reach out, say, hey, I missed our scheduled supervision on Tuesday. I have time to meet with you one-on-one to make up for that. And I'm going to schedule myself on Friday to be with you. It's only for 30 minutes, but that's what I can do in person, or I can do an hour telehealth, which would be better for you. We're modeling these things. I offer choices. I was accountable. And I said, we're going to make this right, right? Without saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. And then getting upset whenever they get upset. It's a natural response as human beings. Okay. Another option for you for creating your task list, feel free to screenshot this one because I feel like this is a really important piece of creating your task list, which is identify the values that led you to be a supervisor. Why are you a BCBA? Why do you do what you're doing? What behaviors of yours show this? What is your supervisee value? What does that beautiful team of RBTs value? Now, how can you make their experience working with you align with both your values and theirs? Now, y'all, when we're looking at large groups of people and this type of like group supervision, there's not always going to be beautiful alignment. Sometimes it's like adjacents, right? Values adjacent. That's also okay. We can't force people to value the same things that we do, but we can find alignment. Alignment doesn't mean matching, right? It's like when you're getting your um, alignment done for your car, doesn't mean that everything's perfect. In fact, it means that it's flexible so that when you hit a pothole, your whole alignment doesn't completely make you veer off to one direction, right? Because that would be not good. So alignment means that we're all going in the same direction, but in a flexible way, right? Okay. Plus two, if we all have the same values, ugh, so boring. We need a little conflict in our lives. We've got to make that happen. And we find some of that through connection, in all honesty. We find value through connection, and we find connection and conflict when we're making these connections between terms and applications, between practice and application, between acceptance and commitment therapy and practice and application and teaching others, right? There's conflict there, and that's okay. That's part of what helps us establish stronger connections, right? Scar tissue is really actually pretty strong because there has been some sort of conflict there. It's not always pretty, but it's there, right? The same can be said for many relationships, right? Long-term relationships have experienced conflict and they've recovered from that conflict through values and committed actions. That's what supervisory relationships are also supposed to look like. I'm not saying pick fights with supervisees, but I am saying when they bring up something that's of a conflict, lean into it a little bit more. No, it doesn't mean you need to avoid the conflict, right? It doesn't mean you just need to say, like, oh man, you're right, I was wrong. It's not necessarily true. I've seen that happen too with BCBAs. And I'm like, no, you now have 45 programs because an RBT said that they had a problem one day. And because mom said they had a problem one day. And because then another RBT said they had a problem one day. And now every time that there's a problem, you're adding another program. Like that's also just reinforcing like this. That's not building connection. It's not resolving conflict, right? Instead, say like, ooh, okay, let's work through this. What happened exactly? Okay, it sounds like this antecedent wasn't set up correctly, but I don't think that I made it clear enough in the instruction that that's the way the environment should have been established beforehand, right? Sometimes that's what it is. Cool. Figure out through the challenge. Lean into it. Don't just acquiesce. Don't just avoid. Lean into it. That's the same thing with supporting. They're not on their own, but they need to be on their own, right? They shouldn't be on their own yet, but we need to get them there. So, how are we going to fade this support in a way that's meaningful? And how are we also going to help them feel capable and competent to meet these challenges as they arise? So, when you're creating your task analysis, be really clear about this is what you're trying to accomplish. These are the hows. Now you, as a supervisor, are responsible for creating what that looks like within each supervisee relationship. Awesome. Okay. Last little bit as we wrap up. These are our committed actions. We're supervisors. Every moment of our day feels like it's consumed by values-based actions. And yet sometimes we still find ourselves drifting really far away from our values. So that's why it is important for us to review what it is that we're doing. Review the things that we feel like we don't have to anymore. I have found myself really guilty of this, which is not reviewing the things that I know that I need to and just assuming that my supervisee understands or that the supervisee does understand, when in fact they don't. Or they can report, verbally say something, but then the application is missing. And I assume based on verbal report that the application is understood, and it's not. So review, then reflect what you need to change to get the supervisee able to understand this application and what it should look like. Then develop a plan. How are you going to engage in some stronger committed actions that are going to actually help keep you more in alignment with your values? Do you need to add an additional modification to your day? Do you need a different sort of accountability system to help you check in on these reviews and reflections, right? Then let it go. Not everything's going to go as planned. Not everything is going to be perfect. Not every supervisee relationship is going to be beautiful. Let it go. Focus on the ripples that are the most meaningful. Realign, get back on that bike, practice it all again, right? Keep going. Make adjustments where you need to, but keep moving forward. Pause, take a sip of water, tea, and then let it go so that you can move forward in a healthy way. Okay. Remember this, y'all. Act isn't a way to avoid challenges. It's not always going to be beautiful. You're not always going to be happy. It doesn't mean that the people that you work with who also practice ACT are always going to be happy. It means that sometimes we're all in challenge mode. We're battling something. We've got to lean into those challenges sometimes. Take action that's rooted in your values, not in avoidance, but in your values, right? Be really mindful and observant about what that looks like for you, as well as for any supervisee that you might have the privilege of supervising. Y'all, the final step is finally here. So next month, December 18th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sorry. Um, we're doing our final one, the final step. It's never the final step. This is going to be one that we really talk a lot about practicing, modeling. Be prepared to move for this one. It is going to be a little bit more hands-on and a little bit more physical. Don't worry. You're not going to be doing the splits unless you want to. But it is just going to be, you're just going to be moving just a little bit more, as well as setting some things up for yourselves. Okay, cool. Now, October, back to that. I had recorded it. I did not record it. I just ended up giving it to two people. So we'll have to do a makeup recording. Email me if you want to participate in it. If not, I am going to send out, I'm going to end up recording it more than likely on Wednesday, the 26th of November, just to get it out of the way. But if you are interested in attending on Wednesday, the 26th, please let me know. And I'm happy to send you a link. And hopefully that one will record. As always, if you are interested in your CEU credit, which I would think you would be, this is a Supervision CEU, email ace@acrossenvironments.com with your BCBA number, as well as 3 takeaways. Your takeaways for this one can be your task analysis. That's why I set it up in just those 3 if you wanted. So please, if you wanted to make your task analysis your takeaway, that works for me. If not, 3 additional takeaways at ace@acrossenvironments.com. Please allow 2 weeks for your certificate of completion once you've done that. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a fantastic night. Bye-bye.